Welcome to the Fall Garden 2021 here at all of our buckets were prepared like we do for second season crops. We removed all of the remnants of the summer vegetables. Then we removed the top 2 inches of the potting mix out of the buckets and discarded that. The reason to remove the top 2 inches is in case there are any spores or larvae that are wanting to try to overwinter. Then we just make new potting mix and fill the buckets the rest of the way back up. And that's all you have to do for season 2 of reusing your Larry's potting mix recipe. Come along and I will show you what I'm planting and what companion plants I'm planting with, what I'm planting and why. Peas. Peas went with carrots as infallibly as ham went with eggs. For years, I thought that carrots and peas grew on the same vine. Let's talk peas here for a minute. Peas are a legume, and they will take nitrogen out of the air, fix nitrogen into the soil. Honestly, peas do not need extra fertilizer other than what I already have in the mix with the mushroom compost. If you over fertilize peas, especially with nitrogen, what you're going to get is a lot of pretty leaves and not any peas. The only time I might fertilize, I might side dress the peas after the first round of pods are harvested. But even then, I'm going to go with something higher in phosphorus and low nitrogen. Planting peas. Well, they need a trellis. English peas need a trellis. And you really need to be picking varieties that work well in your neck of the woods. I do not have a lot of success in growing peas in the early spring. I find they grow best here in my central east section of Alabama. They grow best for me in the fall, and actually the peas are sweeter in the fall when they're exposed to cooler temperatures. However, they will not survive a hard frost. The vines can take a frost better than the pods. So you need to keep that in mind, plant them at the right time, and maybe think about shorter day varieties. So let's go over how to plant them. I'm not adding any fertilizer. I'm going to be planting 2 rows at the back of this 14-gallon container. Normally, in a 5-gallon container, I can grow anywhere from 4 or 5 pea plants. With this being a 14, I'm going to be definitely doubling that. On this row, I've got 4 14-gallon containers, and that's where my peas will go. You want to plant your peas an inch deep and somewhere around 1 inch to 2 inches apart. And you will not have to thin them. What I'm planting are Wando peas on this row. Wando peas are ready to harvest in about 68 days, and they are a favorite shelling pea in the South. I'm putting 6 on the back row right now. Now, the reason I'm dividing them this way is because I had 2 packages of Wando seeds. This package I just opened is from Southern Seed Exchange. And I noticed that immediately, like the next day, they were starting to show roots. So they're going on the back row. And then the front row was an older package of seeds. 2015, that's how it's sold, by 2015. So these were bought either in 14 or 15. And they weren't showing much signs of life as fast as the other seed packet was, but just had to give them a little bit of a day, because looky there, they're looking good, most of them too. So my front row will be the Wando seeds from Baker Creek. Now, what are some good companion plants for peas? Well, if you're growing in a bucket, you kind of, like I am, you kind of have to think, well, I don't want to squeeze out anything. I need to give them enough nutrients and enough room. But these peas are going to go straight up the trellis, and I've got, you know, like well over half of my bucket here in the front that I can plant something that would be a companion. Turnips are a good companion plant for peas. Mustard greens, and also cilantro. The peas help to keep the soil very loosened, and that's why turnips and mustard greens are good to plant with them. The peas actually benefit those 2 crops. Cilantro has a different reason to be planted with peas, because it deters aphids, white flies, spider mites, and potato beetles. And if you leave it to flower, it's going to attract parasitic wasps and hoverflies that will feed on these bad pests. Because cilantro is a cool weather crop, this time of year is the only time I can grow it. And if I let it go to seed, I can harvest those seeds. Because if you don't know, cilantro seeds are actually coriander, and I like to cook with coriander. But I have chosen to plant mustard seeds, mustard greens, in front of my peas. Now, mustard greens are going to need some fertilizer. This is just a balanced organic fertilizer. This is Garden Tone. Now, will this work into all of the soil, like back there by the peas? Probably, but it's not going to hurt anything. And I've marked on my tag Wando peas. Back row, Southern Seed Exchange. Front row, Baker Creek. I'll be planting 3 different types of mustard seeds. And this is called Florida broadleaf. It is a big favorite in Southern cuisine. You can see how tiny these mustard seeds are, and I've had these for quite a while too. Got them down at our local seed and feed store. Now, you saw that I just broadcast those on the top, and I'm going to lightly sprinkle some more potting mix on top of that. You need about a 1/2 inch of soil on the top. Now, if you're just planting mustard greens on their own, some good things to plant with mustard greens, again, are peas, because it loosens the soil. Thyme can actually improve the flavor. Beets which help to preserve the iron in the soil. Onions can control pests, and celery also will keep away bugs. But celery gets really big, so it would be my last resort in terms of planting with mustard seeds. Mustard greens have a similar nutritional value to both kale and collards. They grow best in cool temperatures. So again, fall is about the only time I ever grow any of these vegetables. I gave up on trying to do an early spring garden after attempting it, I don't know, 3 or 4 years in a row. And there were never enough days for things to get going and growing before the heat took over, or before I needed my buckets for my summer crops. So I just isolate all these things I'm planting today for the fall garden. The Florida broadleaf variety is an heirloom, and it can get like 16 to 22 inches tall. I will thin out these mustard greens once they start to get their first 2 or 3 sets of true leaves, and I'll take you along for that ride and show you how I do that. This particular variety, the Florida broadleaf, in researching it, the first known seeds, Florida broadleaf seeds, was in a seed catalog in 1925 in New Orleans. And shortly after that, they became so popular that all the southern seed catalogs started carrying this variety of mustard greens. And of course, you know, mustard, if you actually let it go to seed, you can collect that and use it in your cooking. When kids look at broccoli, they call it little trees because they see it for what it looks like. We, as adults, forget to think figuratively and have to be reminded. Next up, in this 5-gallon bucket, I'm going to plant broccoli, and I'm going to put a little bit of lettuce in the front. Now, a couple things about broccoli. Broccoli consumes a lot of calcium, which is another reason why it's so good for you. So instead of just a regular fertilizer, I like to add bone meal because bone meal provides that extra calcium. I could not find a separate bag of bone meal. All I could find was bone and blood meal mixed together, but that'll be okay. And I'm just going to add a couple of handfuls. Mix it in. The variety of broccoli that I'm growing is Emerald Crown. Actually, I'm going to put this right here in the middle of the bucket. Now with broccoli, you can stand to kind of bury just a little bit of the stem. And broccoli likes the potting mix to be very firm. So I really push it down firmly. This particular variety, Emerald Crown, is a really good one for the east. It produces in about 60 to 70 days. It has large, well-domed heads, and it resists purpling in cold weather, which is why it makes it a really good one for planting in the fall. And look at me, look at what I did. I get busy talking and then I didn't do what I always do. Jeez Louise. With my transplants, I always like to put mycorrhizae in there. Foundation is the brand that I use, soluble mycorrhizae. Yo, hush! And that's a generous teaspoon. You want the mycorrhizae down there by the roots, because that's where it's going to benefit. Pardon the dogs, they heard a noise. All it takes, hear a little noise, they go nuts. Lettuce is like conversation. It must be fresh and crisp, so sparkling that you scarcely notice the bitter in it. Now I'm just going to put a couple of lettuce here in the front. The lettuce will be harvested way before the broccoli comes to a head, so it's not going to rob it of any nutrients. What are some other good companion plants for broccoli? Well, dill is a good one. Again, dill is going to deter pests from its strong smell. Basil, thyme, also good for the very same reasons. Garlic, lettuce, radishes, Swiss chard, shallots, any of the onions, shallots, garlic, that's going to repel pests. So I will finish out this row and then show you what I've planted, what other kinds of peas I've planted and what I've planted with them. So again on this row, it's consistent, but it does alternate. Remember, with companion planting and any kind of vegetable planting, confusing the enemy is a good thing. The enemies are your bugs and consistent diseases that affect the same plant, so mixing it up is good. So Wando peas and Florida broadleaf mustard greens in the front. Broccoli in 5-gallon buckets and lettuce that will be harvested. Same thing with the peas and the mustard greens in the other 3 containers there. But I also added cilantro in the front. A chrysanthemum, by any other name, would be much easier to spell. My fall garden wouldn't be my garden without some chrysanthemums. Remember, chrysanthemums have the ingredient pyrethrin, which is what you will find in most pesticides, so they naturally repel a whole lot of bugs. Now on this row, the peas are not shelling peas, they are snap peas, and they are the sugar snap variety. Again, I have mustard greens planted in the front, but this group of mustard greens is a little different. It's actually called tatsoi. Tatsoi is an ancient variety that is very cold tolerant, and they have spoon-shaped leaves. It is a Chinese heirloom that is a non-heading mustard green that's really great to add raw in salads or in stir-fries. It grows very differently than regular mustard greens do. From their dark round spoon-shaped leaves, they grow on a broad, tender, crisp white stalk. It almost looks like celery at the base, and they have a very tangy but mild mustard flavor. With the broccoli here, I have English thyme in both this 5-gallon bucket in the middle row and in that one. And again, thyme is going to repel a lot of pests. You might notice too that I've added 3 stakes around the broccoli in each of the buckets in a triangular fashion, and that's to help when they grow up to keep them from falling over, especially in high winds. And then this back row has yet a 3rd variety of a snap pea, the Mammoth Melting Sugar. And I really love these snap peas because even if the pods are a little over mature, they're still very tender. On this back row, I actually planted transplants of mustard greens, and these are the Southern Giant Curled. You see why they get their name. Broccoli with red romaine. One more cilantro. And broccoli with red leaf. And a dog drinking out of the gutters. He's such a gutter dog. It must have been those collard greens. It made me lose control. Collard greens. Collard greens. I'm going to be putting blood meal, a couple handfuls in the bucket. And blood meal is high in nitrogen. And if you'll remember, high in nitrogen means a lot of leaves. And the collard greens, it's the leaves that you eat. Now normally, I just put one collard green in a bucket and you'll get really big ones. But because we are not planting both gardens this year, just don't have the time. Plus we can't find perlite in the big bags. It's absolutely crazy. I'm going to, instead of just one, I'm going to be planting 2 to 3, depending on how many I have in this tray. 3. So again, because these are transplants, I'm going to use my mycorrhizae. You want to plant collard seeds 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost. Collards are similar to kale in their resistance to cold and their high, rich nutritional content. And also, a frost actually triggers sweetness in the collards. Another reason why I like to plant them in the fall. The average temperatures where collards will grow best are between 50 and 70 degrees at the highest, and you want to plant in full sun. Some good companion plants for collards: hyssop, which is an herb and it deters cabbage moths, as well as thyme. And dill, another herb, will attract wasps that will eat the cabbage worms. One who is proud of ancestry is like a turnip. There is nothing good of him but that which is underground. Turnips just need a balanced fertilizer. Again, I'm using this Espoma Organic Garden Tone. Just put a couple of handfuls in there. I could add more, but I can also come back and add more. Now, to plant the turnips, they are a fussy seed. They're in that fussy category, so you need to direct sow them. I am planting purple top, white globe. And then they'll eventually have to be thinned, just like the other greens. Surface sowing and then sprinkling about 1/4 of an inch of potting mix on the top. Of all the greens, the turnip greens are my favorite. Not just the actual turnip. Turnips will be ready to harvest 45 to 50 days after planting. Some good companion plants to plant with or near turnips are catnip, garlic, garlic chives, thyme, onions, and peas. People hate beets because they taste like dirt. On the other hand, other people embrace them because they taste like dirt. And I think eating dirt or soil or the smell of soil is primal. Beets. They just require a balanced fertilizer. They are also fussy seeds, so you need to plant them directly. The variety that I'm planting has a lovely name, Bull's Blood. These are sown at 1/2 inch. Their final spacing is 2 to 4 inches. I'm just laying that out. And then sprinkling about 1/2 inch of potting mix on the top. Far and away the best beet plant companions are all members of the allium family. That's going to be your bulbing onions, scallions, leeks, chives, shallots, garlic. Garlic is said when it's grown with beets to actually improve the flavor of your beets. This is kind of important if you or your family does not like the taste of beets. I might need to go stick some garlic with my beets. Additional options are lettuce and radishes, both which are shallow rooted and will be harvested before your beets, and any of your aromatic herbs like hyssop, thyme, catnip, rosemary, and any of the mint families. You can also plant your beets intermixed with brassicas. The answer isn't another pill. The answer is spinach. Spinach, the vitamin-rich superfood. Spinach is a cool season vegetable. It likes temperatures of 50 to 60 degrees. And if you're planting in the fall, you want to plant about 6 to 8 weeks prior to your first frost date. Spinach also it likes high nitrogen. So again, I am adding blood meal to my mix. Okay, I'm going to have to take some of this out. I can't put it in my other buckets because they're planted. You can pre-germinate spinach. You can start it indoors. But I'm early enough in the season that I can go ahead and just direct sow outside. They germinate best in between 45 and about 68 degrees. And of course, we're going to have to thin these eventually. Space them out. What I am planting is winter Bloomsdale, sometimes called Bloomsdale long standing. This is a 50-day harvest. And I mean, this Bloomsdale is an old standard since like 1925. And it does better in hot weather than most spinach does. 1/2 inch depth, and eventually I will thin between 3 to 6 inches apart. One other thing, you kind of want to use fresh seeds with spinach. They seem to lose their oomph faster than other seeds. They deteriorate more quickly. That package of Bloomsdale, I think, was a year, maybe 2 years old. But I also, just for the kicks of it, planted some Bloomsdale in front of these chrysanthemums. And that package was, 5 years old. So we'll see if they come up. One more type of spinach. Again, add some blood meal in. The other type of spinach that I'm planting, I have planted in the past and I really liked it. And it's an Italian spinach. It's called Gigante di Inverno. In English, Giant of the Winter. And as I said, it comes from Italy. It is a European heirloom. And it produces these beautiful, big, broad, deep green leaves well into the fall and the winter. Don't know how well it would produce in the northern winters, but down here it will stay good for quite some time. Now these seeds sell by 12/31/18. They are older. They're 3 years old. So we'll just have to see how they do. And look at me, I didn't take my topsoil off. So I'm just gonna force these seeds down a little bit. Now, what are some good companion plants with spinach? I mean, obviously, since I'm growing in buckets, most of the time I keep my greens by themselves without a companion plant. I put companion plants nearby. I mean, the chrysanthemums is an exception. The peas, I'm putting the mustard greens, that's an exception. But that's because it was a 14-gallon container. So if you grow in raised beds or in ground, or just want to plant something like I do close by, some good things, companion plants for spinach. You always want to plant something, if you're planting in the same bucket, that doesn't compete with each other for food. And several of your leafy greens fit well in that criteria. So you could mix spinach with kale, lettuce, Swiss chard, watercress, beet greens, cilantro. Other things that are good companion plants with spinach are all of the brassicas, all of the alliums, and peas. An onion can make people cry, but there's never been a vegetable that can make people laugh. Let's talk onions. Well, I didn't show planting these bunching onions because the dogs were having one of their conniptions again. So I just said, oh, just plant it. You can talk about it later. So that's what I'm doing. I love bunching onions. First off, they're mild in flavor. They're great to eat on the side, like on a relish plate. My grandma used to make a relish plate, like onions, pickles, sliced tomatoes. And I still have her beautiful little glass golden looking relish plate. But I also especially love them in salads. And their mild flavor makes them easily digestible. The wonderful thing about bunching onions, I sometimes call them walking onions. I'm not sure if they're the same, because the walking onions actually kind of walk in that if you let them go to seed, they drop seed and they move forward. These are bunching onions. They are a perennial. In the fall, you want to plant your seed somewhere between 8 and 10 weeks prior to your first frost date. They will overwinter. In harsher climates, you might need to provide a little bit of protection, some mulch or something over them. But in my climate, they'll overwinter just fine. And in the spring, they'll spring back up nice and green in these little bunches of onions. And at that point, you can divide them and make more plants. Now, one thing about onion seeds, they don't stay viable for very long. A lot of places will tell you 1 year. You can possibly get a few that will germinate in the second year, but I haven't had very good luck with trying to store onion seeds and have them be viable longer than about a year, year and a half. This packet of seeds that I had, I bought last year. So I had them. I didn't want to go buy new ones. So I thought, well, let's just see how these do. So this will be a test of the emergency onion seed system. If you sow your seeds in the fall, 8 to 10 weeks before your first frost date, you will be able to get a fall harvest. But you can also leave some of them in place, as I said, and in the spring, they're going to form more bunches of onions. Another thing I wanted to mention here, just in general, about planting seeds. Obviously, you need to keep them watered. I come out twice a day, in the morning and again later in the afternoon, and give them a light watering on top. But I do the same thing with my transplants for probably about a week until I can see that the transplants are really taking hold. They're not looking droopy. And then I know that they are wicking, that the roots down there are reaching the moistened soil in my buckets. And another curious thing that I've noticed, and it's just a theory, but in buckets where I have planted a transplant and also planted seeds, the top of that bucket stays much more moist, visibly moist, compared to a bucket like this where I have just put seeds only. My theory is that those transplants are already wicking and they're drawing up water to the plant, and therefore it's keeping the rest of the container at the top more moist. Now, you can also mulch on top of your containers where you have seeds to keep the moisture in. I definitely do that if I'm direct sowing in the summertime, because you can't keep it watered enough. And things like pine straw. I've had a hard time getting easy straw lately, the last 2 years actually, through the whole COVID mess. I can't get the easy straw, but I have been using my very fine pine straw that we use for the bedding in our chicken coop, and that works. And I could do that here for these fall crops too. The thing is, if you do that and you mulch it, you really need to be aware of when you start to see the green shoots coming up, because at that point you want to move that mulch away so that those shoots can get the sun. And sometimes that's a little tricky to do, to move the mulch away when you have all these little bitty tiny baby seedlings coming up. So for me, in the fall especially, I just really make sure that the top stays moist a couple times a day. Companion plants for onions. Well, honestly, I kind of see it as the reverse. I see onions as a companion plant for a slew of vegetables. And here's you a list. Now, since we're talking fall crops, those are the ones that I'm going to give you, where onions are a companion plant with those typical fall crops. Cabbage, carrots, beets, lettuce, Swiss chard. Another thing to note, you never want to plant alliums with beans, with peas, which for me is a fall crop, asparagus, summer crop, beans are summer crop, and sage, which sage could be both summer and fall. Cabbage, a familiar kitchen garden vegetable that's about as large and wise as a man's head. Cabbage. Cabbage are heavy feeders. So I'm going to put a little bit more of this in. And once every 3 weeks to a month, I may come out and side dress the cabbage. So this is just a balanced fertilizer. Got my balanced fertilizer in there, my mycorrhizae, and my cabbage. The reason I can mix this fertilizer directly in and not adding it as a ring later on is because it is organic. Slow release organic, so it's not going to burn the roots. This kind of cabbage is called stonehead. A very good producer in the southeast. There's a long list of companion plants for cabbage. You've got beets, carrots, celery, cilantro, garlic, onions, oregano, parsley, sage, and spinach. But of course, since I plant mine in 5-gallon buckets, I don't plant anything with the cabbage. The only thing I can do is plant things near it as deterrents, for example, with like the cilantro or the onions to deter pests.
Gardens, or yards, as the inhabitants called them, were stored with gigantic plants of kale or colewort.
Even though we grow kale for its leaves, kale is not a high nitrogen needer. It does not require nitrogen-rich soil. So, again, just a couple of handfuls of balanced fertilizer. Now, again, because I'm limited on the amount of buckets and the quantity and variety of things that I want to grow, I'm overcrowding it a little bit. I put 2 in, I'm putting 2 in this bucket and 3 down at the other end. And again, not keeping all my kale side by side. This is Blue Ridge kale. A few things to note about kale. It is exceptionally cold tolerant. In fact, it maintains its dark green color and its rich nourishment long into the fall and winter, when most other crops have withered and died. It can withstand temps down to 20 degrees. Now, if you plant it in the cool season, you need to put it in full sun. If you plant in the warmer seasons, like early spring, it can take partial shade. Just like the cabbage, I won't be interplanting any companion plants with kale, but if you're growing in raised beds, here are some good ones, and it's a very long list. Garlic, basil, dill, sage, thyme, hyssop, beets, celery, lettuce, onions, peas, radishes, and spinach. Bok choy. This particular one is a hybrid called Joy Choy. These are heavy feeders also, just like cabbage. These are ready to harvest though in 45 days. Doesn't take as long as cabbage. And again, because of space limitations, I am crowd planting the bok choy.
Shallots are for babies. Onions are for men. Garlic is for heroes.
I'm a couple of weeks early to plant my garlic. But I'll tell you why I'm going ahead and planting at least this bag is because I found garlic in a box that I had ordered. And I mean, it had to be almost a year ago. So I don't even know if it's still any good, but I pulled out the cloves that were still hard. So I'm going to attempt to plant these while I order some other. I always like to order my garlic from Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. And this specific kind is Nootka Rose. It is a soft neck garlic. Typically here in the South, I mean, you can plant certain varieties of hardneck, but soft necks really grow better, and you get bigger cloves with them down here than we do with the hardneck. So basically, I mean, garlic's pretty easy to grow. It's not real fussy about the soil, the potting mix. Just make sure you've got some compost in it. Mix it up real well. Normally, in my neck of the woods, we plant garlic mid-October. I mean, you can all the way up through maybe even the 1st of December, but it'll be later in the summer when you get a harvest if you wait that late. But basically, you want to plant the fattest cloves you have. Pull some of those out. These are pretty small here, but I'll save them just in case I need to fill in. Now I plant my garlic where I have 1.5 to maybe 2 inches of potting mix above it and about 5 inches apart. So I'm just going to start in the middle. Pointy side up, the root side down. Push it on down in there. And I've got about 2 inches. So about 5 inches apart. Now planting these right now, I should be able to expect a harvest probably around mid to late May. You know, it's kind of funny. I heard somebody say one time about garlic. I mean, it takes a long time, you know, for garlic to mature. They said, good grief. Planting garlic and harvesting garlic's about like having a baby. About the truth. About that many months. Pointy side up, 2 inches down. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned. We'll keep you up to date in the garden, what's going on with each plant. Show you the growth. And eventually show you the harvest and how to preserve each item. So as always, bye. Keep looking up and have a good one.